it seems incredible, doesn't it? I mean, only probably a couple of weeks ago, Mike, we were talking about the future of migration in this country, and your report in which you said we might need something like 15 million Birminghams if we carry on, or 15 new Birminghams rather, not 15 million Birminghams by the time we reach about 6 or 7 or 10 years from now. And we had a sort of lawyer's view on the show at the time. And he said, oh, this is all rubbish because it's all down to Ukraine and Hong Kong. The only reason net migration is as high as it is because of Ukraine and Hong Kong. Well, these figures show that that's not true.
Well, that's correct, Mike. If you break down the figures, there's actually been a decrease in the number of, sort of BNO Hong Kong visas, resettlement visas for Ukrainians. But you look at the work visas, they're up to, around 585,000. That's a 54% increase. Student visas, roughly 650,000. That's an increase of 8%. And 82,000 family visas, that's an increase of 117%. Sorry to say this, but the Conservative Party are now a party of mass immigration. And I'm not saying that in a partisan way.
Yeah.
That's just a statement.
No, listen, I think it's very, very hard to argue with any of that, isn't it? Carl, I mean, I'll put it to you. Whatever the Conservative Party might say about wanting to stop the boats and wanting to clamp down on immigration, when they came into power in 2019, they'd already been in, for 6 years, even if you count the Lib Dem sort of coalition scenario. I mean, the point is that it was only 230,000, the net migration figure in 2019, and it's now tripled. So how they can actually stand there and say that we're the party of controlling immigration, I don't know.
Well, indeed. And in fact, the revised ONS figures, they've revised some of the historical data too. And the 2019 level is only, I think, 184,000 now.
Right.
So based on their manifesto promise in 2019 of overall numbers will come down, if they're going to get to that, they're going to have to cut numbers by 75% on what we saw last year.
Right. And they have this kind of mantra, don't they, that, well, these are people coming that we need to work here. So we give these work visas to people to work in the NHS because without them, we can't make the NHS work. Well, the NHS doesn't work anyway, whether they bring people in or not. And what seems to be happening from the figures that I've seen is that there's a lot more dependents coming now. So that one figure that I saw, for example, the number of Indian workers that came in, 35,091 into the healthcare service, but they brought 47,400 relatives. I mean, that seems extraordinary.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it does make a slight mockery of some of the assumptions around how migration will drive growth.
Yeah.
But there's a deeper flaw to that narrative. I mean, we've had the last 10, 15 years, the highest levels of migration in British history ever. This has also coincided with the lowest period of productivity growth in 200 years, according to economic historians. I mean, clearly migration is not the only factor at play here, but you just can't ignore that.
Well, you can't, because, I mean, let's face it, Mike, if we talk about the numbers, the sheer numbers of people now living and working or not working in this country, there has to be some correlation to that and the difficulty with people getting housing, people getting into schools, people getting appointments with doctors. There may be plenty of immigrants working in the NHS, but there's more immigrants trying to get seen by the NHS, aren't there?
Well, the consequences of this unchecked immigration are dire. If the net migration trend persists, we at Migration Watch, project that Britain's population could skyrocket to 85 million by 2046. And that's equivalent to 18 new Birminghams, not 15.
Yeah.
So our previous projections were conservative by comparison. And, such growth will exert intolerable pressure on, land, housing, transportation and public infrastructure. And, you're looking at many more GP surgeries, roads, hospitals, police stations, universities, colleges and so on that will have to be built as a result of this.
Right. And has there been some suggestion, Carl, that the government is going to limit in the future some of the access that currently is achievable? For example, I've been speaking since Mike and I have been talking for the last few weeks about how they blocked a lot of applications from Bangladesh now for business courses because they worked out an awful lot of people from Bangladesh were getting visas, starting the courses and not finishing them. So now that's considered to be a bit of a scam. They've surely got to do something about all these relatives coming.
Absolutely. I mean, they have started on that. So from January this year, most classes of student won't be able to bring their dependents with them. But that will shave a bit off the overall numbers. But the Department for Education has a long-term education strategy for universities, and the goal there is to get foreign students up to 600,000. So even if you're cutting the dependents, you still want to boost the overall numbers. So they're kind of committed to growing migration.
And what about the financial figures, Mike? We hear from those who support mass migration that, this is all good for the country because if you're a student from overseas, you bring loads of money with you. You might bring some other people from members of your family. You'll be spending the money. But if people are staying here longer than the visa that they've got allows them to do, then, surely that's a massive problem, isn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, if you look at the cohort who are arriving in the UK at the moment, they're from outside of the European Union or outside of the European Economic Area, which is abbreviated non-EEA. And if you look at previous studies, for example, Oxford Economics, they did a study in 2018. Non-EE migrants were a 9 billion drain on the economy. We at Migration Watch did a study in 2016. We showed they were a net drain of 15.6 billion. And, Dussman and Frattini, two academics, they did a study in 2014, and they showed over a 17-year period, non-EEA migrants were 118 billion drain on the economy. So there's a sort of myth here that immigrants are a net economic benefit. I mean, at the end of the day, a larger population will increase GDP because you have more people, but ultimately economic growth is dependent on GDP per person, or what they call per capita. Yeah. So ultimately it's about productivity. It's more about quality rather than quantity. But if you do increase the numbers at an unsustainable rate, you are going to impose enormous pressure on transport, housing, public infrastructure and public services. And, this can cause enormous problems in terms of productivity and what the Treasury spend their money on.